The security footage showed it clearly. The black maid pulling two drowning babies from the pool, her uniform still dripping as she prayed over their trembling bodies. Then the billionaire walked outside, looked at his rescued daughters, and did what left everyone speechless. It happened on a Florida afternoon so bright it seemed impossible for anything to go wrong. Inside Elliot Hargreaves' $15 million estate, silence had become a religion. No laughter, no music, no life beyond the hum of purified air and the click of expensive shoes on marble. The only warmth in that cold mansion came from a woman the family never truly saw. Amaris Vaughn, a maid who whispered prayers while she folded laundry and sang hymns under her breath while she cleaned. But on this particular day, while Amaris stood in the kitchen preparing bottles, two curious toddlers crawled toward the shimmering blue pool in the backyard. No alarms sounded, no cameras blinked red, just silence until it was almost too late. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning. Because when you save a life and still get punished for it, you discover whether your faith is real or just decoration. And sometimes, God allows injustice not to abandon you, but to reveal who's really been blind all along. This is the story of a woman who believed God sees everything, a man who believed money could control everything, and two innocent souls caught between grace and grief. If you've ever been punished for doing the right thing, this story will break your heart, and then heal it. Keep watching. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to see how far this story has traveled. Subscribe now to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves emotional stories like this. But to understand how we got to that moment, the moment a maid's faith collided with a billionaire's grief, we need to go back 3 months. Earlier, to the day Amaris Vaughn first walked through those iron gates and into a house that didn't know it was dying inside. She had prayed before the interview, prayed in the parking lot, prayed again in the marble foyer while waiting for Mr. Hargreaves to descend the spiral staircase like some corporate ghost. The job paid well, too well for someone with her resume, but Amaris didn't question blessings. She'd learned long ago that God opens doors you didn't even know you were knocking on. Elliot had been cold from the start. Not rude, exactly, just absent. He spoke in bullet points, work hours, duties, rules, lots of rules. The twins were 6 months old then, still tiny enough to cradle in one arm. Elara had her mother's dark curls. Celine had her father's sharp gray eyes. But when Amaris looked at them, she didn't see genetics. She saw miracles wrapped in onesies. The first time she held them, she whispered a prayer so quiet, even she barely heard it. Lord, let me love them the way you do. And for 3 months, she did. She learned that Elara liked to be rocked in circles, while Celine preferred gentle bouncing. She learned that the house was full of people, gardeners, security, housekeepers, but somehow still empty. She learned that Elliot never sang to his daughters, never read them stories, never stayed in the room longer than it took to confirm they were breathing. Grief had turned him into a warden instead of a father. But Amaris kept praying, kept humming old hymns while she warmed bottles, kept whispering blessings over the girls when she changed their diapers or rocked them to sleep. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because some people are called to love where love has gone missing. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. Bright. Hot. The kind of Florida heat that makes the air shimmer like liquid glass. Amaris had just put the twins down for their nap, or so she thought. But Elara had been fussy, and Celine had refused her bottle, and by the time Amaris went to the kitchen to prepare a backup, both girls were wide awake and crawling. She should have heard them, should have noticed the silence shifting into something else. But the blender was running, and the kitchen window faced the wrong direction. And for just 90 seconds, 90 heartbreaking seconds, she lost track of two babies who moved faster than anyone expected. When she finally turned around and saw the empty playpen, her stomach dropped. "Alara? Selene?" Her voice cracked. The house swallowed the sound and gave nothing back. She moved through the hallway, the living room, checking corners and closets with her pulse hammering in her throat. And then she saw it. The back door, slightly ajar. The one that led to the pool deck. The one she knew she'd closed. Time didn't just slow. It shattered. Amaris ran. She exploded through that door and saw them both, Alara face down in. The shallow end. Selene floating near the steps, her tiny dress billowing around her like a broken flower. The water was so blue it looked fake. The sun so bright it felt like a mockery. There was no thought, no plan. Just her body moving faster than her fear. She hit the water fully clothed, her sneakers filling instantly, her uniform dragging like chains. She grabbed Alara first, pulled her up, gasping, coughing, and shoved her onto the pool deck. Then she spun back for Selene, who wasn't coughing, wasn't moving. "No, no, 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 God, please." She pulled Selene out and laid her on the warm concrete, her hands shaking so hard she could barely position the baby's head. She pressed her mouth to Selene's tiny lips and breathed. Once, twice. Pressed her chest gently, the way she'd seen in a video years ago. She didn't know if she was doing it right. She just knew she couldn't stop. "Breathe, baby. Please. Jesus, make her breathe." And then Selene coughed, sputtered, gasped. Both twins were crying now, loud, ugly, alive crying, and Amaris collapsed beside them, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. She wrapped them in pool towels, pulled them against her chest, and rocked them like her life depended on it. "Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you." She said it over and over, a prayer and a gasp and a plea all at once. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her, didn't hear the door slam open, didn't realize Elliot was there until his shadow fell across all three of them like a verdict. "What happened?" His voice was ice. Amaris looked up, tears streaming, still holding the twins. "Mr. Hargreaves, they fell in. They fell in." He repeated it like an accusation, not a question. His face was stone. No relief, no gratitude, just cold, surgical rage. "I pulled them out. I got them breathing. You let them get to the pool in the first place." Her breath caught. I was only in the kitchen for a minute." "A minute," his jaw tightened. "A minute is all it takes. Mr. Hargreaves, please. I saved them. You endangered them." The words hit harder than a slap. Amaris tried to stand, still clutching the babies, but her legs were shaking too hard. "Sir, I would never—" "You were hired to keep them safe." His voice rose now, sharp enough to cut. "And I find them soaking wet, nearly drowned, because you weren't paying attention." "I was—" "Enough." He pulled out his phone and made a call without looking away from her. "Security, come to the pool, now." Amaris felt the world tilt. "Mr. Hargreaves, you're done here." The twins were still crying in her arms. Selene reached for her face with a tiny, wrinkled hand. Alara clung to her soaked uniform, but Elliot didn't see that, or maybe he did, and it didn't matter. 2 security guards arrived within seconds. One of them, a man, named Marcus, who'd always nodded politely at her in the hallways, looked genuinely confused. "Sir? Escort her off the property, immediately." Amaris's voice broke. "Please, let me explain." Elliot finally looked at her, really looked, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was fear so deep it had turned into stone. He was terrified, and terror makes people cruel. "You're fired. Leave, now." Marcus reached for her arm gently, but it still felt like violence. Amaris let him guide her to her feet, the twins still reaching for her as another staff member hurried over to take them. She wanted to scream, wanted to beg, but all she could do was pray. God sees the truth, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. God sees. They walked her through the house, past the other staff who looked away, out the front door, down the driveway. Her uniform was still dripping. Her hands were still shaking. And when the iron gates closed, behind her with a metallic clang, she stood there on the hot pavement, alone and soaking wet, with nothing but her faith and the memory of 2 babies breathing when they shouldn't have been. She dropped to her knees right there on the sidewalk, and she prayed. Not for revenge, not for justice, not even for understanding. She prayed for Elliot. Because she knew something he didn't yet. God doesn't waste pain. He uses it. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones he's preparing to heal. The sun was setting by the time Amaris finally stood up from that sidewalk. Her knees ached. Her uniform had dried stiff with chlorine and shame. But her spirit, bruised as it was, hadn't broken. She'd learned that kind of resilience young. Growing up in a roach-infested apartment in Atlanta, Amaris had watched her mother clean houses for families who never learned her name. She'd seen her mama come home with bruised knees and calloused hands, smelling like other people's cleaning products, and still find the strength to kneel beside Amaris's bed and pray. "Baby," her mother used to say, "when people can't see your worth, don't you dare start believing them. God sees. And when he moves, everybody else got to get out the way." Her mother had died when Amaris was 17, breast cancer that spread faster than they could afford to fight it. But those prayers stayed. That faith stayed. Even now, standing outside a mansion that had just spit her out like something dirty, Amaris could hear her mother's voice. God sees. So she didn't curse Elliot Hargreaves, didn't plot revenge or call a lawyer or blast him on social media. She just whispered one more prayer into the Florida twilight. "Lord, let the truth come to light, not for my sake, but for those babies, and for that broken man who doesn't know how to grieve without destroying everything he touches." Then she walked to the bus stop, because even the righteous still have to figure out how to get home. Inside the mansion, Elliot Hargreaves was discovering that silence could be loud. The twins wouldn't stop crying. They'd been inconsolable since Amaris left, their little faces red and swollen, their cries echoing through rooms designed to absorb sound. The night nurse he'd called in tried everything, bottles, rocking, singing, but nothing worked. Alara kept reaching toward the door. Celine's eyes searched every face for the one that wasn't there. Elliot stood in the nursery doorway, watching, his chest tight with something he refused to name. He'd done the right thing. He had to have done the right thing. She'd been negligent, distracted. The babies had nearly drowned on her watch. What kind of father would he be if he'd just let that slide? But then why did the house feel like a tomb again? Why did his daughters look at him like he was a stranger? He retreated to his office and poured himself a drink he didn't want. The security monitors on his wall cycled through camera feeds, front gate, driveway, pool deck. That pool! He stared at the blue water glowing under the landscape lights and felt his stomach turn. He'd almost lost them today, both of them. His hand trembled around the glass. There was a knock at the door. Marcus, head of security, stepped in with a tablet in his hand and an expression Elliot couldn't quite read. "Sir, I need to show you something." Elliot didn't look up. "Not now." "Sir?" Marcus's voice was firm. "It's about this afternoon, the incident at the pool." That got his attention. Marcus set the tablet on the desk and tapped the screen. "We ran a routine review of the perimeter sensors. One of the poolside motion cameras caught something. I think you need to see this. Elliot's jaw tightened. More evidence of her negligence? Marcus said nothing, just pressed play. The footage was black and white, time-stamped, perfectly clear. It showed the pool deck from an elevated angle, empty at first, then two small shapes crawling into frame. The twins, moving faster than Elliot realized they could, heading straight for the water. Then the door burst open. Amaris appeared, running, not jogging, not walking quickly, but sprinting, faster than seemed possible in her uniform and sneakers. She didn't hesitate, didn't freeze, didn't call for help first. She dove. Elliot watched her hit the water fully clothed, watched her grab Alara with one arm, shove her onto the deck, spin back for Celine. Watched her pull the second baby out and drop to her knees, her hands moving frantically. He couldn't hear the audio, but he could see her mouth moving, praying. She was praying while she saved them. The timestamp showed the entire sequence, 93 seconds from the moment the twins entered the frame to the moment they were both breathing on the pool deck. 93 seconds in which Amaris Vaughn had done everything right, and he'd punished her for it. The glass slipped from Elliot's hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. He didn't notice. He was still staring at the screen, watching the moment Amaris collapsed beside his daughters, watching her wrap them in towels, watching her whole body shake with sobs of relief. "Rewind it," he whispered. Marcus did. Elliot watched it again. Watched her run. Watched her dive. Watched her refuse to let his children die. How long was she in the kitchen? His voice sounded hollow. Marcus checked the timestamps from the interior cameras. 90 seconds, sir. She was preparing bottles. The twins crawled out of the playpen the moment she turned her back. 90 seconds. The same amount of time it took her to save them. Elliot's chest felt like it was caving in. The room spun. Every word he'd said to her, every cold, cutting accusation, came back like shrapnel. You endangered them. You weren't paying attention. You're done here. He'd looked at a woman who'd just saved his daughter's lives and treated her like a criminal. He'd let his fear turn into cruelty. He'd let his grief make him blind. Sir? Marcus's voice was careful. What would you like me to do? Elliot stood abruptly, the broken glass crunching under his shoes. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. Where is she now? I don't know, sir. She didn't have a car. She left on foot. Find her. The words came out strangled. I don't care what it takes. Find her, now. Marcus nodded and moved toward the door, but Elliot's voice stopped him. Marcus. Sir? When you find her... Elliot swallowed hard, the shame rising in his throat like bile. Tell her I need to see her. Not here. Not privately. Tell her... He stopped, his voice breaking. Tell her I need to make this right. In front of everyone. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, sir. After he left, Elliot stood alone in his office, staring at the frozen image on the tablet screen. Amaris on her knees, his daughters alive in her arms, her mouth open in prayer. He'd spent 3 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that control could prevent pain, that money could buy safety, that rules could replace love. He'd turned his home into a fortress and his grief into ice. And it had taken a maid with wet sneakers and a mother's faith to show him the truth. You can't control life. You can only choose whether to meet it with fear or with love. Elliot pressed his palms against the desk and bowed his head. For the first time since his wife died, he prayed, not eloquently, not with the right words, just a broken whisper into the silence. God, if you're real, if you're listening, help me fix this. Please, I can't do this alone anymore. And Somewhere in the space between shame and surrender, something ancient and patient began to move. Because God doesn't always answer the first prayer, but he never ignores the first honest one. They found Amaris 2 days later in a studio apartment she shared with another housekeeper, folding laundry and listening to gospel music on a phone with a cracked screen. When Marcus knocked on her door and told her Mr. Hargreaves wanted to see her, her first instinct was to say no. Not out of bitterness. Amaris didn't have space in her heart for that, but out of self-preservation. She'd prayed for truth. She'd prayed for healing. But she hadn't prayed for the strength to walk back into that house and face the man who'd broken her. "He said it's important, ma'am," Marcus added quietly. "And he asked me to tell you. He said he's sorry." That changed everything. The next morning, Amaris walked back through those iron gates wearing the same modest dress she'd worn to her first interview, her Bible tucked under her arm like armor. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. She didn't know what awaited her, didn't know if this was reconciliation or some new humiliation. She only knew that when God opened a door, you walked through it, even when your knees were shaking. What she found in the main foyer stopped her cold. Every staff member in the house was there. The housekeepers, the gardeners, the night nurse, the chef, the security team, at least 20 people, standing in a silent semicircle. And at the center of it all, holding both twins in his arms, stood Elliot Hargreaves. He looked different, smaller somehow. His tie was crooked. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, which, Amaris would learn later, he hadn't. When he saw her, something in his face cracked open. "Miss Vaughn." His voice barely carried across the room. "Thank you for coming." Amaris nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Elliot handed the twins to the nurse, then stepped forward. The room held its breath, and then in front of everyone who worked for him, everyone who'd watched Amaris be escorted out in shame 2 days earlier, Elliot Hargreaves did something no one expected. He dropped to his knees. Not figuratively, not partially. He got down on both knees on that cold marble floor, looked up at the woman he'd wronged, and let his carefully constructed walls collapse. "I was wrong." His voice broke on the words. "I was scared, and I was grieving, and I let that turn me into someone cruel. You saved my daughter's lives, and I punished you for it. There is no excuse for what I did. None." Amaris felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't look away. Elliot pulled something from his jacket pocket, the termination letter, now wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee rings, as if he'd been carrying it around, reading it, hating himself with every word. He tore it in half, then in half again, let the pieces fall to the floor like snow. "I reviewed the security footage," he continued, his voice steadier now. "I saw everything. I saw you run. I saw you dive. I saw you breathe life back into my daughter when I—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "When I wasn't there. When I haven't really been there for them since the day they were born." Someone in the room sniffled. Amaris realized it was Marcus, standing with his arms crossed, looking away. "I built this house to keep them safe," Elliot said, "but I forgot that safety isn't the same as love. I hired people to care for them, but I was too afraid to care for them myself. And then you came along, someone with no obligation except a paycheck, and you loved them anyway, not because you had to, because that's who you are." He looked up at her fully now, and Amaris saw something she'd never seen before, a man who'd finally stopped running from his pain. "You told me, as they escorted you out, that God sees the truth." Elliot's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You were right. He does. And he used you to save my children when I was too broken to save myself." The room was silent except for the soft cooing of the twins. Elliot stood slowly, then held out his hand, not as an employer to an employee, but as one human being to another. I can't undo what I did, but I'm asking, begging for the chance to make it right. Not just by giving you your job back, but by giving you the authority and respect you should have had from the beginning. Amaris took his hand, not because she had to, but because forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what God asks of you when your heart is soft enough to hear him. I forgive you, Mr. Hargreaves, she said quietly, not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to it would only hurt me, and I didn't survive my own grief just to drown in someone else's. Something shifted in the room then, something you couldn't see but everyone could feel, like a window opening after years of stale air. Elliot turned to face the assembled staff. From this moment forward, Miss Vaughn isn't just an employee. She's family. She has full authority over this household and the care of my daughters. What she says goes, and anyone who has a problem with that can leave right now. No one moved. He turned back to Amaris, his voice softer now. I don't expect you to trust me yet. I know I have to earn that, but I'm asking for the chance to try. Not just as your employer, but as someone who wants to learn how to be the father those girls deserve. Amaris looked past him to where Alara and Selene sat in the nurse's arms, their gray eyes wide and curious. When they saw her, both babies reached out, making the little gasping sounds that meant they recognized her, remembered her, had missed her. She walked over and took them both, one in each arm, and felt the last of her hurt begin to dissolve. Then we start today, she said, and we start with prayer. Over the following months, the Hargreaves mansion transformed. Music returned first, Amaris's gospel hymns drifting through hallways that had been silent too long. Then laughter, as Elliot learned to play peekaboo and make funny faces and let his daughters smash cake into his designer shirts during their first birthday party. He started joining Amaris for the twins' bedtime routine, started asking her questions, not about schedules or protocols, but about faith, about how she'd survived her own losses without letting bitterness win, about what it meant to trust God when life felt like drowning. She answered honestly, patiently, the way her mother had once answered her, and slowly, something broken began to heal. 6 months after that terrible afternoon, by the pool, Amaris stood in that same spot, watching Alara and Selene splash in the shallow end under Elliot's watchful eye. The gate had new locks now. Alarms covered every inch. But more importantly, there were eyes that actually watched, hearts that actually cared. Elliot waded over to where Amaris stood, water dripping from his rolled-up pants. He looked younger somehow, lighter. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on us." Amaris smiled. "I didn't save you, Mr. Hargreaves. I just reminded you that you were worth saving. God did the rest." He nodded, watching his daughters giggle and splash. "I spent 3 years thinking I could control everything if I just built high enough walls and made enough rules. But you can't control life. You can only choose how you meet it." "And how are you choosing?" Amaris asked. Elliot looked at her, then back at his daughters, then up at the blue Florida sky that suddenly didn't seem so threatening anymore. "With love," he said, "even when I'm scared, especially when I'm scared." That night, after the twins were asleep and the house had settled into its new, gentler rhythm, Elliot stood alone in his office. The security tablet sat on his desk, the footage from that day still saved in his files. He'd watched it 100 times, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered. But tonight, he didn't need to watch it again. He knew the truth now. God doesn't always stop the storm. Sometimes he lets it rage, lets it strip away everything false, Lets it reveal what's been hidden underneath your fear. And when he does, no amount of money can stand against it. No amount of control can contain it. No amount of grief can silence it. Because love, the real kind, the kind that dives into water fully clothed, the kind that prays over strangers like their family, the kind that forgives even when it costs you everything, that kind of love doesn't come from us. It comes through us. And when it does, even billionaires learn to kneel. Even broken fathers learn to hold their children again. Even houses built on fear learn to become homes built on grace. Elliot closed his eyes and whispered the prayer that had become his nightly ritual. The words still clumsy, but growing more honest each time. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't. For sending someone who loved them when I'd forgotten how. Help me be the father they deserve. Help me be the man you're teaching me to become. And somewhere in that Florida mansion, in a room filled with soft night lights and the gentle breathing of sleeping twins, Amaris Vaughn smiled in her sleep. Because she knew something the rest of the world was still learning. Faith isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up even when you're scared, even when you're doubting, even when the water is over your head and you can't see the bottom. It's about trusting that when you jump, someone is already there to catch you. And sometimes, if you're really blessed, you get to be the one who does the catching. The one who shows others that drowning doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of learning how to breathe again.